Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at two plated daily trainers. We have the New Balance Supercomp Trainer V2, and we have the Adidas Adizero Prime X2 Strung. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and the file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Now, the reason we're taking a look at these two shoes in particular is they are some of the most popular and thickest plated daily trainers around. And yes, I know the SC Trainer V2 had its stack height reduced, but I think it still represents a very fun and unique plated daily trainer. And then on the other hand, or other foot, I should say, we have the insanely thick Prime X2, which is unlike anything else out there. And I think if you're someone who wants a longer run shoe or a max cushion shoe with a plate to kind of stiffen things up and help you notice that rocker geometry, I think that's where these shoes come in. While they are in the same category, I do think they have completely different experiences, so I'm excited to talk about them. Now, we do have a massive price difference, which may be a key factor for a lot of people. The X2 comes in at a whopping $300, while the SC Trainer V2 is $180. Still not cheap, but $120 cheaper compared to the Adidas version. The stack heights are also quite different. SC Trainer has 40 in the heel, 34 in the forefoot for a 6mm drop, while the Prime X2 is on an island of its own, just a whopping ridiculous stack height here with 50 in the heel, 43.5 in the forefoot for a 6.5mm drop. So about the same drop, but 10 more millimeters of stack height in the Prime X2. And while the Prime X2 is thicker, it's also heavier, over an ounce heavier, coming in at 10.8 ounces for a men's size 9, while the SC Trainer is only 9.7. And yes, both of these are relatively heavy for the super plated daily trainer category. If you want something a little bit lighter, and I will say faster, take a look at the Magic Speed 3 and the Endorphin Speed 3 from Asics and Saucony respectively. The midsoles here are completely different, and we'll start with the Prime X2 mainly because this is unlike anything else I have ever used in my entire life. It has 50 millimeters of Light Strike Pro, the same thing we see on Adidas Pro 3 Super Shoe. However, it also has another trick up its sleeve. We also have Light Strike Pro Core, at least I think that's what they're calling it. And essentially, if you look here in the middle between the top and bottom layer, you have a softer, bouncier version of Light Strike Pro, and I believe there's another kind of unit directly under your heel. So you have a dual density setup here with two different versions of Light Strike Pro, the traditional version that makes up most of the midsole, the top layer and bottom layer, and then a core unit in between those two layers. Now, to control all of this Light Strike Pro and both of its versions, you have two different carbon-infused plates. There's one on top that extends the full length of the shoe, and another about 3/4 length plate that is right below that. And again, sandwiched in between those two plates is the Light Strike Pro Core, softer, bouncier version of Light Strike Pro foam. I hope that makes sense. That's a whole lot going on there, but it is an insane ride. Feels unlike anything else I've ever tried, and I will say, this shoe does not want to bend. This is one of the most rigid shoes I've ever used as well. So a lot of you are probably thinking this is a large shoe. It has a soft foam, which means it's probably unstable. And I'll actually say that is not the case, and for a couple reasons. The first is if we flip the shoe around and we look at the heel section, you'll notice it's asymmetrical and the medial side has a bit more foam to it, just a bit more substantial, which means it keeps your foot from rolling inwards and you have a little bit more compression on the lateral side. And that definitely proves to be the case. I didn't feel like my foot was consistently rolling inwards or anything like that, and did a good job of making sure there wasn't any excess pronation. The other thing is those two plates really do kind of manage all of this foam and give you a rather stable experience, especially because you have an incredibly wide platform, especially in the forefoot. So is it a lot of foam to manage? Yes, you don't want to have weak calves and ankles, but I will say it's not as unstable as it looks. The New Balance SC Trainer V2 has a more traditional setup here with fuel cell foam, one of New Balance's softest and bounciest compounds. Now, two layers of fuel cell, one on top, one on the bottom, and in between those two layers is a full-length carbon fiber plate, which New Balance brands as their Energy Arc system. Goes from your heel and swoops closer down to the ground. I will say it does have a bit more flex and bend to it compared to the extremely rigid Prime X2. Now, I will say because this is a carbon plate, it's going to be a bit more aggressive compared to some of the plastic plated trainers we see, but again, is a little bit more flex to it compared to the Adidas version. It feels incredibly soft and bouncy through the midfoot and heel, but a bit more firm as you get closer to the forefoot. I don't consider either of these to be a truly fast plated daily trainer, although I will say I think the SC Trainer is the quicker of these two models for a couple different reasons. One, It's over an ounce lighter, which does make a big difference, has a more manageable midsole, and has a easier, quicker turnover at those faster paces, at least in my opinion. Now, if we take a look at the Prime X2, this is almost kind of like a moon bounce shoe, rather heavy at 10.8 and feels a little bit bottom heavy. Just feels kind of awkward once you really try to get going on those faster runs. It excels, at least in my opinion, on those medium to slower paced efforts, just rolls you along nicely and feels like you can run forever just because that Light Strike Pro and Light Strike Pro Core, like we talked about before, gives you a wonderful, energetic, yet well-cushioned experience. And before we talk about the upper, I will say I think the SC Trainer is the one most people should get for a couple obvious reasons. One, price, it's over $120 cheaper an ounce lighter and is a more versatile option. And if you haven't tried a plated daily trainer before, I think this is a great way to go. It's kind of like having a max cushion shoe with a little bit of pop to it because that plate rolls you along much more aggressively compared to a more conventional max cushion shoe. However, if you're someone who has $300 and has tried all the other running shoes out there and wants something completely different, that is where the X2 comes in. It feels, again, unlike anything else I've ever tried. Feels like you're running on a thick slab of foam from start to finish and has a nice level of kind of energy return to it without being too squirrely or unstable for the reasons we talked about before, having more foam on the medial side. And those plates do an excellent job of stabilizing the foam while allowing you to take advantage of the energy return properties and cushioning. There is no ground feel whatsoever. Feels much thicker and substantial compared to the SC Trainer, which is already a thick running shoe. And because these plates are so stiff and kind of cool fact, you can see through the midsole, just rolls you along nicely and just feels like a soft, thick bed of foam that you're just running on top of, but without being too unstable. And yes, it is $300, which is quite expensive. I do wish it was lighter. It's a bit heavy at 10.8, and it's not ideal for going fast. Definitely not a race day shoe, at least, again, in my opinion. But for a fun cruiser of a daily trainer, I think this separates itself from every other running shoe out there. Moving on to the upper, the SC Trainer has a very accommodating fit. It does come in wide if you have a higher volume foot, but otherwise I thought the standard width worked quite well, plenty of wiggle room. The upper material is practically see-through, making the breathability a 10 out of 10. Thought the heel counter worked well, knockdown was solid. My only major complaint was I wish they added some foam blocks on the tongue. Wouldn't add that much weight, and I would appreciate a little bit more cushion there. The Prime X2 has a strung upper, which is rather unique. It's all these individual fibers and strands kind of pressed together and layered on top of each other. Has a really unique texture to it. It's not elastic at all. Does a good job of keeping your foot in place. Breathability, not ideal. Basically, the ventilation is if the strands don't overlap, there's a tiny hole that gets into the shoe. Otherwise, I'll say the breathability, not ideal here. As far as the fit goes, it is true size, just like the SC Trainer. I thought it had plenty of room in the forefoot, had a very noticeable arch sensation, a little bit narrow through the midfoot, and the tongue is integrated directly into the upper itself, has a little bit of an elastic nature to it. Was rather difficult to get my foot inside the shoe, but once you're in, you are in, and it kept your foot very secure. Again, a little bit more of a narrow fit through the midfoot, but plenty of room in the toe box, and I do, again, wish the breathability was a bit better here. I did have one issue with the upper, and it was on the inside where this plastic lacing section is. On the inside, just had a little bit of rubbing. It's a weird kind of pressure point. They try to add a piece of cloth over it, but after wearing the shoe for a long period of time, it starts to kind of rub on the side of my foot. Got to figure out a way to kind of relieve that issue. But for me, it just kept pressing into the side, and I was wearing thick socks, so hopefully I can adjust it because I really do like how this shoe feels and just the overall experience with it, except for, again, the tiny pain point at the top. And in personal experience, knit tongues aren't always my favorite. I do wish we had a more traditional tongue, but for the most part, I thought the lockdown and fit was good. So if you had to guess which outsole had a wider base, would you say the Prime X2 or the SC Trainer? I think most people would probably say the Prime X2, and that's not necessarily the case. If you line them up, you'll notice the forefoot has about the same width with a slight edge going to the SC Trainer. And if you line up the heel base area, the SC Trainer has a substantially wider platform, which I think is quite interesting. The larger midsole shoe actually has a smaller outsole pattern compared to the smaller SC Trainer. The SC Trainer has a bit more texture to its outsole rubber compared to the Prime X2 with its very smooth, almost race car tire traction-like pattern with Continental tire rubber. So I don't know if there's anything going on with that, but very smooth pattern on the Prime X2 with a little bit more texture on the SC Trainer. You do have a little bit more ground contact with the Prime X2 just because the SC Trainer has this giant cutout down the middle. And as a cool side note, on the Prime X2, you can actually see both carbon fiber plates with the cutouts that expose these plates all the way through. So very interesting. It's not often you get to see two plates inside a running shoe, which is part of the reason why this is an illegal running shoe. It can only have 40 millimeters stack height. This has 50, and you're only supposed to have one carbon plate, and this has 2. So overall, when comparing these two, the Prime X2 is the thicker, softer, bouncier, and much more rigid option. That's great for those slower to medium paced efforts and works well if you just want to log a ton of miles. While the SC Trainer V2 is great for a wider audience, has a much more bendable carbon fiber plate, a more moderate stack height, which I can't believe I'm saying that, about a 40 millimeter midsole, and I think a more versatile ride, allowing you to pick up the pace in a much more comfortable way compared to the ridiculously thick Prime X2. So let me know down in the comments, which shoe are you going with, and would you like to see New Balance come out with their version of the Prime X2? Because I know I would love to see that. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.